Alright, so now we have all of our UVs laid out. We're just going to toggle off the image so we can see them a little bit better, and let's toggle on shaded UV display. Alright, so now we're going to start painting. This is the fun part. But before we start painting, we just want to move some of these pieces apart. You see that some of them are touching and they're really close together. So I just want to lay these out just so they're spaced out a little bit before we start painting. So I'm just going to go to Shell. We can hit W on the keyboard for the Move tool. And we're just going to move these apart a little bit. That's all we're going to do, really. Just spread them out so that we have a little bit of space in between everything. You also want to make sure that things aren't really close to the edge like that, because we're going to create a UV snapshot, and it's just going to give us this square here. So you want to make sure things aren't right on the very edge. Make sure you don't scale any of these objects. They're already scaled perfectly, and you can see that if you scale any of these, your pixel density will be off. Alright, so the next step is to select all the UVs. So we'll go to UV, and we'll drag a box over all these UVs. And we'll go to Polygons. Let's select UV Snapshot. And you want to crank this number up. I have it at 1,000. I think by default it comes in at 200 and something. But you want to make sure that it's up near 1,000 or even higher. The higher this number, the higher resolution your texture image is going to be. Also too, it'll bog down your system if it's too high. So I'm actually going to make it 1,500. So you want to make sure this is on PNG. PNG images create an alpha channel, which is a transparency channel. So you're going to want that, and we're going to go browse. And I suggest you save it to your project folder, and you can just put it in the images folder, and you can give that a name. I'm just going to name it character UVs, and we'll save that. It should go into the folder that you browse to. Just double check that it's there. Let's right click on that, and let's open it with Photoshop. I'm going to open with, and we're going to choose Photoshop. Alright, so now you can see our UVs are on layer 1 here. We have one layer. Let's just rename that to UVs, just so we know what it is. So I'm just going to create a new layer. We can go to Layer, New, Layer. We'll just name this one Reference. So you can create another layer. Another way to do that is Shift Control N on your keyboard. Name this layer Skin Base. This is just going to be the base skin tone. And let's create another layer. You can create as many layers as you want. You can create a layer for freckles. You can create a layer for skin hues. You can create a new layer for if you want to have pores on the face. So as many layers as you think. I'm just going to do the basic ones now. I'm just going to do one for reference, one for skin base, and then we'll do, I'll call this one skin hues. We're just going to paint some hues in the skin. And I'll make one more for a costume. Let's create our skin base. You can change this color at any time. I'm just going to give them some skin tone right now. Hit G on the keyboard, or you can go to your paint bucket tool over here, and we'll just click to fill that in. And you can see that this layer is over top of our UVs. So we're just going to move this layer by clicking, holding down on the UV layer, and we'll just drag it up. So you see it goes above the skin base layer, and release, and then our UVs are on top. You can press Z on the keyboard and click to zoom in, or you can hold down the left mouse button and drag. You can zoom right into our UVs and see them a little bit better. So now we know exactly where to paint. We can paint some skin hues around the eyes. If you want his nose to be a little bit darker, we can paint there. So I want to make sure I'm painting right on the exact spot. It's pretty common to have to come back here and make adjustments after applying the texture to the character. So before I even start, I'm just going to create a new layer. I'm going to call it Test. It's good to do this before you actually start painting, before you start adding your good paint, just to make sure that you're painting in the right spot so you don't waste your time. So I'm just going to go with a red color. So on this test layer, I want to make sure that you have that activated before you start painting. I'm just going to press B on the keyboard for my brush tool. I'm just going to paint some areas just so I can see that it's working okay. So I'll just paint around the lips. And this is just really rough. I'm just going to circle the nose and just do some random kind of stuff. So I think this is the back. I'm just going to put a B. F for the front torso, the back of his head. Alright, so before you save this texture, you want to hide visibility on your UVs. You don't want to have your UVs showing on top of your character, so we're just going to hide that. And we're going to go to File, Save As. We're going to choose PNG. And we'll just rename this to the color test. We'll just put it in the same area as our UV image. And we'll hit Save. Just hit OK to that. Bring Maya back up, and let's apply this to the characters. So now we'll just run through quickly how to do this. Alright, so let's open up our Hypershade and get to it quickly by clicking here. Or you can go to Windows, Rendering Editors, Hypershade. Alright, so we already have this blend. You can see the checkerboard texture that we had put on there earlier. We can just use this shader here. So let's just double click on it to get the attribute editor up. We connected the checkerboard texture to the color attribute. So just go to the color attribute and we're going to right click over the color attribute and we're going to go break connection. So we're going to get rid of this checkerboard. So now it's gone and we're just back to having a regular blend. Now we're going to click on this again to attach a file texture. We get this create render node window that comes up, and let's just choose file. Next to image name, you'll see this yellow folder. Just click on that, and now we can navigate to that texture that we just saved out from Photoshop. And here it is, character color test, and we'll hit open. And now you can see it's right on our character, and you can see all those silly marks that we made. And it looks pretty accurate. Everything's where it's supposed to be. And that's his back, that's the front, torso. And this way you can see which one's right and which one's left. Circled his knees and put some X's on the bottom of his feet. I'm just going to put some notes next to my textures in Photoshop just to make sure that I know which one's right and left. I'll bring Photoshop back up and let's just squish it to the right side for a second. Bring Maya to the left. So in Photoshop, let's turn our UVs back on. Alright, so I know this is the right ear. I'll just look at the same mark that I made in Photoshop. And I'm going to use my brush tool. I'm just going to put a little R next to it, just in this general area. So I know those are the right ears. And since those are the right ears, I know these are the left ears. We'll get rid of these other paint marks later. So can you see here the hand with X's is the left hand. Alright, so now that we have all that determined, that'll help us with which side we're painting on. And you can just go to your eraser tool by hitting E on your keyboard. Let's change the brush to something like that. It's already there. You use our right and left brackets right beside the P on the keyboard to change the size of your brush. And we're just going to delete this stuff. Okay, so I just realized I did that on the test layer. It's okay, we'll just get rid of this reference layer. We can just delete that layer and we'll just rename this one reference. And that's a reminder to know which layer you're painting on. On the reference layer, we can just drag the opacity down, just so we don't see it so much. Let's turn on our lighting rig. Now we can switch this panel to the camera panel. So let's go to perspective, under perspective, switch it to camera 1. And let's make sure our camera panel is activated. I'm actually going to bring this up to 720 HD. So let's click on our render settings for a minute. And we'll just change this to 720 HD. And let's do a quick render. If you click this 1:1 ratio, it actually gives you the correct size. You might have to drag your window open a little bit, and that'll give you the correct resolution. Alright, so you can see our textures on here. I think the lighting is a little bit bright. So let's just make some adjustments. If you find these lights hard to select, you can always scale them up. Just drag over all the scale values and press 2. I'm going to scale them up to 5. I made adjustments to the lighting. Our top key light, I have it at 0.6, and then the back key light is at 3, so about half the value. And then my bottom key light's at 5, and I just half the value for the back, it's at 250. And then our fill lights are a little bit lower, 150 and 150 on the bottom. And I went with 3 on the top for the fill light and 150 in the back. And then our shadow light is at 500. So you can keep making adjustments till you're happy with the lighting, and I think this is pretty good. I'm just going to render the whole thing again. Of course we can change this later. I just want the lighting to look reasonably decent as I'm testing my textures. Okay, I think that's looking okay, but we've lost our shadow. So there's a couple things I want to do before we continue with the texturing. I just want to adjust our lighting and get that done. We want to have only the spotlight shining on our ground plane. We want to have these directional lights not affecting the ground plane at all, or not shining on the ground plane, because the directional lights are drowning out the shadow. So we're going to do some light linking to stop the directional lights from shining on the ground plane, but only shine on the character. So what we do is go to lighting and shading. We're going to go to light linking editor, and then we're going to go to object centric. So we're going to select the ground plane. It's just called ground plane 2. We didn't really name it. We could name it now. You can see here it's called ground plane. It is a good idea to name these lights. We'll name that front right key light, and that front bottom key, and back bottom key. We'll name that front left fill, front bottom fill, and back bottom fill. This is the object list, and this is the light list. So we want to select our ground plane, and we're just going to click on each one of these directional lights to stop it from shining on the ground plane. We're just going to get the directional lights and we're going to leave the spotlight. If we re-render that now, our shadow is back. It's looking pretty grainy because we need to adjust our render settings, and it's actually coming off the ground plane. What we should do is expand our ground plane a little bit bigger. We want to bring the light up. You can see how the shadow is being dispersed in such a large area. The higher up we bring the light, the smaller the shadow will become. So we'll bring the light up a little bit. Bring it up to about there. And let's go to our render settings. You can see how the shadow is very grainy. That's just because the render settings are set to custom, low quality. So let's put this to production quality. And now if we render that again, it's looking better, but that shadow is really dark in the middle. So we'll bring the light up a little bit more, just to get the shadow a little smaller. And we can turn on perhaps one of the directional lights in the back, the top backfill. So let's just click on the top backfill and let that shine on the ground plane. And now let's render that again. I'm just going to render this bottom part. There, so we just have one of the directional lights shining on it, and that actually looks pretty good. Keep this open. You can minimize it. I have another screen, so I'm just going to drag it to my other screen for now. And we'll just close these up. And now we're going to continue on with our texturing. So I'm just going to run through the basic workflow. It's a good idea to change your layout a little bit, just so things are a little bit easier to select. I have my Hypershade open over here, but I'm going to close it, and we're going to just change this panel to the Hypershade. So we'll go to Panels, Panel, and I'll just choose Hypershade. That way I can quickly select my blend, and we want to get the attribute editor open, and we'll go to the color attribute, and we'll just hit the link here. Now let's open up our Photoshop again with the Maya still open, and let's just go in and start to color the face a little bit. So I'm just going to zoom in. I'm going to choose my brush tool. I want to brush with some gradients, so let's choose this one here, and I'll use my bracket keys beside the P on the keyboard just to scale that up a little bit. We'll just do a quick test. Okay, it works, so we'll just Control Z to get out of that. So I'm going to switch my color swatch here to the skin tone that I chose, and we'll click on that to open up the color swatch. Now normally if you're painting a zombie character or something like that, you might want to go really dark around the eyes, but this is just a generic character, so I just want some real generic skinning on him. So I'm just going to go a little bit darker around the eyes. Usually people's eyes, nose, and cheeks have just a bit of a different skin hue, maybe a little bit darker, and maybe around the ears as well. Some people's ears are a little bit more red or dark. So I'm just going to change this to a little bit more of a darker color. The same color, just a little bit darker. Okay, we're going to use the skin hues layer, so we're not affecting the skin base at all. We're just going to paint on top of the skin hues. That way we can erase it or make adjustments to it later. And you'll want to continuously change your brush size. Alright, so let's just test that and see how that looks. I'm going to turn UVs off, and let's just go to File, Save As, just like we did before, and we'll choose PNG. And we can just select the character color test that we used before, and we'll just hit Save. If you want to replace it, we'll say yes. Okay, and let's go back to Maya, and all we need to do is reload the texture. So we'll just hit the Reload button, and you can see it automatically updates. You can take a look here, but you always need to do a render to see how it turned out. So I'm just going to get my camera in a little bit closer. So I'm just working on the face right now. And actually, let's go to our channel box and we'll turn the eyes on. So let's do a quick render of that. You can see the color difference here, but it's not very pronounced. So you'll want to go back and make more adjustments. So I know I need to go a little bit darker with this. I can turn the UVs back on, and I can just erase what I did before. Just hit E on the keyboard for the erase tool. We can completely just get rid of that. You can hit Control Z if you make a mistake. And also too, if you go a little bit over an area where you don't want to go, you can use the eraser tool. Just hit E on the keyboard and change the brush for your eraser to something with more of a gradient, like this one. Enter that, and then you get rid of some of the paint. And then go back to your brush tool to add more. And it's the same process. You turn off the UVs, File, Save As, choose PNG, select your color test, and save. Yes to replace it. And then back to Maya again. Choose your blend if it's not already chosen, and you can see it reloaded already automatically. But if it doesn't, you just go to the color link and hit reload. And now we can do another render test. You can see that it's really dark in the Maya file, but when you render it, it looks a little bit different. And when you change the lighting, it might look a little different as well. So I think that looks okay. I might actually go a little bit lighter, but once I get the hue that I like, then I'll go around and just do the nose and just areas on the face where I think we can add different color hues. Then I'll choose a darker color for the inside of the ears. And I'm just going to give his lips a little bit of color, maybe a more of a reddish tone. So let's actually go back to the skin base. Let's take a sample of it. Press I on the keyboard for the eyedropper. You can see that it changes our color swatch over here. I'm going to go back to skin hues layer and we'll paint on the skin hues layer. Press B on the keyboard. Now that I have the skin tone here, my color swatch, I want to give it a bit more of a reddish tone. And perhaps we'll darken it up a little bit. Let's save this out and see how it looks. So if you don't already see the texture there, we're just going to hit reload. And I can see that we have way too much lip color. It's always coming down his chin. Looks like he's got lipstick smeared all over his face. So we'll just make adjustments to that in a few minutes. But I'm just going to do a quick render test. Let's just get his face and we'll do a render region. Okay, so you can see what I've done on the ears. That actually looks okay. Maybe a little bit too dark around the ears. I can tone that down with the eraser tool. And perhaps a little bit darker on the nose. It's a little bit too much. We'll go back and make another round of revisions and tweaks in the Photoshop file. And then I'll come back into Maya and reload the texture. And we'll just keep doing that until we're happy with what we see on the face. So I want to use the eraser tool to get rid of some of the paint in here in this area. Because you can see here, I don't want to have it all dark over here. Maybe just a little bit on the tip of the nose and near the nostrils. So what we could do is we'll just use the erase tool. But I don't want to erase it that much. So you can change the flow up here in the top with our eraser tool on, or if we bring it down to say 10, somewhere near 10, it'll just erase less. So I don't want to have these hard edges, so I'm just going to erase just in this area. Okay, so now the ears. I want to get a little bit more color near the edge of the ear here. I have to be careful because I know that there'll be a hard edge right on the side of his ear here where the seam is. So I want to be careful I don't hit that seam. Use the eyedropper to get this color again, and we'll hit B and start painting. So this is where the seam is. I don't want to paint over that seam like this. The color will just abruptly stop on the side of his head. We don't want that. Or you can just go ahead and paint freely over it and then use the erase tool. Alright, so I'm just going to repeat the process, turn off our UVs, save our file, save as, and we'll go to PNG and just save over the same texture image that we were using. And you can see what I mean about the texture. This is where our seam is, so I painted over the seam a little bit, and I did it on both sides. So I'll have to go back and use the erase tool and just make sure that we don't go that far with the dark texture. But let's give it a quick render. Okay, so we're going to fix the seam around the ears. Perhaps the ears are a little too dark as well. The nose is looking a lot better. It's not so dark all up in here. Maybe I'm going to get around the nostril a little bit more, and we're going to fix the lips. We're going to have to increase the color around the lips. After taking some time to finesse it a little bit, continuing to work with the texture and reloading it into Maya, this is what I came up with. And I decided to abandon the color on the lips, but I added some hues to his cheeks here, just to accentuate the cheekbone area, and just tweaked out the ear area and the nose and eye area. So what we'll do now is we'll put some color on the eyebrows. We'll just give his hair a shader. Alright, so I'm just going to use a blend, and let's actually rename this. This is his skin, so let's just name it body texture, and we'll rename this new blend to eyebrows. And let's create another one for the hair. I'm just going to use blends because they have a subtle highlight on them. So I'll just create those ahead of time and then I'm going to apply them. Alright, so let's go back to our channel box editor and let's turn the hair on. So I can just select the hair, we'll right click over our hair blend and we'll go assign material to selection. Now the brows are a little trickier. We're going to have to select the faces. You can try and paint the eyebrows right in Photoshop. You can create a new layer and paint the eyebrows here if you like. You can take that approach, but I think what I'm going to do is just select the faces and apply a shader right to the faces. So we'll just go to faces, and I'm going to select all the faces of the both brows, and I'm going to apply that blend to them. Alright, so I'm just going to do one first and test it. We'll just give it a darker color for now. Alright, so I applied the eyebrow blend to the faces of the eyebrow. You can see that what I did was I grabbed the outer faces of the eyebrow, applied a darker color brown. If you're going to do something like this and you want to choose the colors, click on the color swatch. And Maya actually has this eyedropper. So you can eyedrop the color of his skin, then go back into the color swatch and bring it down. You can bring the darkness down. That way you get the same color, but just darker. And that's a great way to do the eyebrows. And then I went around and I selected the faces around the eyebrows, duplicated the blend for the eyebrows, and just made the faces around the outside of the eyebrows a little bit lighter. That's just the way I chose to handle the eyebrows. You'll want to turn the reflectivity down on all the blends. Alright, so let's do the other eyebrow. Sometimes it's easier to go inside the head to select these faces. And we're going to apply the dark eyebrow color. I'm just going to select all the outer faces around the eyebrow. We'll assign the lighter eyebrow color to that selection. We'll render that region. And that's looking pretty good. Alright, so let's just do the hair now. So I'm going to use the eyedropper, and I want to select his skin tone, and then we're just going to go a little bit darker with the hair. Alright, so we'll just leave his hair color like that for now. Let's actually render top of his head here. I just want to make sure that the hair is not looking like plastic. The eccentricity I'm going to turn up, and the roll off I'll turn down, just so the hair has some gleam to it, but not too crazy. And even the specular color, we can just turn it down. And just keep making adjustments and rendering your region to check it. We'll do the same thing with the eyebrows. Let's work on the eyes a little bit. We're going to put a ramp in here just to give it some stylization, just so it's not a flat color. Okay, so you can see here we have our eye white, our eyebrows, the two eyebrow shaders, our hair. There's one for the iris and the pupil. So let's double click on our iris shader just to open up the attributes. We're going to attach a texture to the color attribute. So we'll just click on that, and we're going to choose ramp. So you'll see the ramp has these two color options. Right now it's just set to black and white by default. You can click anywhere in the middle here to create a new one and move it with the circle on the top, and then you can exit here to get rid of it. Alright, so we're just going to change the color of each of these. We'll just work on the black one first, and we'll select the color swatch here. I'm just going to select a green color. We'll start with true green, and then we'll just make adjustments to it here. Alright, and then we'll go to the other one. We'll do the same thing. We'll start with true green, but I'm going to make it a lot darker. I'm going to have basically what we're going to end up with is a dark rim around the edge of the iris, and it'll just give it a nice look. It'll give it a little bit of depth. So we're going to bring those two pretty close together here in the middle. We'll just make this one a little bit darker. So we want to keep the interpolation at linear, but the ramp type, we want to change it to circular ramp. And you can see it change up here in the sample. Alright, so let's just take a look in the hypergraph for a minute. Go to Windows, Hypergraph, or we can use the outliner, and let's look for the eye groups. And let's just select one of the irises, and we'll open up the UV texture editor. Alright, so let's just select the faces. So here's the UVs for the iris. We'll select all the faces, and we can hold shift down, right click, and choose planar map. And we can just click off here, and we'll just leave that the way it is. We're not going to unfold it or anything like that. So let's just minimize that for a minute. Now the circular ramp is sitting on there properly. Open up the attributes for your iris again, and now we can just sort of tweak this out a little bit. So now you can see the effect when you drag this out. You get a nice dark rim around the iris, and if you look at your iris, it does have a dark rim around it. And then you can choose how gradient this is. I'm just going to render a region here to see the difference. So perhaps not so dark, so we can just change the color here. So by clicking on the color swatch, we'll just lighten that up a little bit. And we're going to planar map the other iris. Just select all the faces. Hold shift down and right click, planar map. And that's all you really need to do. We're going to close the UV editor. You don't need that anymore. And the other eye should look exactly the same because that iris shader is applied to both irises. Alright, so this is what we ended up with so far. I'll probably tweak this out a little bit more. Maybe these areas are a little bit too dark. So right now I want to work on the body, and I'm thinking I want to put a super suit on this guy. So I'm going to go into my Photoshop file. I'm just going to make his suit blue, and I'm going to give him some red boots and red gloves. And I'll change the colors later, but I just want to get the placement right first. I'm going to use my polygon lasso tool. We have a costume layer, but I'm going to rename this costume blue. And I'll create a new layer. I'll name it costume red. So the costume blue is just going to be the majority of his suit. And I can just use my polygon lasso tool to select the region. I'm going to block in an area around one of his legs. And I'm just going to fill that with a blue color. You can easily change the color later. Right now I'm just going to get just any old blue color in there just to get it started. And we'll fill that in. Now you can see that now I can't see my UVs, but we can bring the costume layer, we can drag it down below the UVs so that we can see it. You can hold Control down and tap D to get rid of this selection, to deselect. And I'm just going to repeat the process for all of his parts. If you make a mistake, you can press Escape on the keyboard, and that'll deactivate the lasso tool. L on the keyboard activates the lasso tool. I'm going to leave his neck for now because I'm going to do something a little bit different with the neck. And we'll attach that, and then we'll fill that with the blue color. And Control D to deselect. Right now, so we're just going to hide our UVs. Let's give that a save. We'll just save over the color test image that we've been using for our character so far. And let's reload the texture in Maya again. So we'll double click on the body texture, click on the color link, and we'll reload. Alright, so this is what we have so far. Now I want to have the suit come up his neck just like we had in our reference file for the modeling. I just want to have the neck end around here. So we'll go back into our Photoshop file. Now we have to turn the UVs on, and let's look for the neck. The neck is, these are the two pieces for the neck. Now we have to match up the front with the back. So I'm just going to go along maybe this edge here. Just choose an edge. And we'll fill that with our blue color. Now I'm going to go to the front of the neck, and we'll do the same thing. I'm not exactly sure which edge on the back of the neck lines up with the edge on the front of the neck, but we're just going to sort of guess, and then we can bump it up and down later to match it. So I'm going to actually create a new layer. And you can create as many layers as you need. I'm going to name this one front neck costume. I know that I'm probably going to have to move that layer up or down to match the front and back. So I'm on my new front neck costume layer, and we'll just zoom in and we'll do the same thing. I'm just going to pick one of the edges, and I'll make a selection that follows. And we'll fill that in. Alright, now I'll turn our UVs off, and we'll do the same thing. We'll save it. We're going to reload. And did I match it? Oh, it matches almost perfectly. Let's actually render that. That might match just perfectly. We'll just do a quick render of that. Pokes out a little bit, so we can fix that very easily. And we'll just check the other side while we're at it. That side looks pretty good, but we can smooth that out a little bit. It's going to be the front texture on the left side. So let's take a look. Because we saved this on a different layer, we can actually move this independently. There, and that fixed it. Alright, so now let's work on his gloves. A different color for his gloves and for his boots. Then we'll put a belt on him and add a symbol. Alright, so I'm going to start splitting this off in layers now. So we'll go costume hands. I'm going to do costume forearms. I'm going to hit L on my keyboard for my lasso tool. We'll go to the costume hands layer, and we'll start blocking this in. Switch our color swatches, and I'm just going to choose a red color, and we'll fill that in. So let's create a new layer for the feet. And we'll do another layer for costume legs. Alright, so make sure we're on the costume feet layer. I'm going to hit L on my keyboard for this lasso tool. And we'll just fill that in. Alright, so now I want to get the gloves on the forearms. I want to get that separation just like we did on the neck. I'm going to create a new layer. So we're going to create a new layer for the right front leg. And right back leg. We're going to go right front leg and we'll stamp out a pattern on that. Alright, so we're going to save that. Okay, so I didn't get the point quite exactly in the right spot, but it still looks pretty cool. But we can fix that in the Photoshop file, no problem. I'm going to continue blocking this in, and then I'll have to go back into Photoshop and just move these over accordingly. And then we'll just keep refining it in Photoshop until we get all the points and the texture the way we like it. So I'm going to continue with creating new layers. I'll just make all my layers now. We'll go left front leg and left back leg. And then we'll do a new layer for the front of the torso and the back of the torso, because we're going to have a belt that wraps around. So this is my rough blocking into the costume, and we'll save it off and load it into Maya, see how it looks, and then we'll decide where we need to make our changes. Okay, so I did this really rough. I knew that wasn't going to line up, but just to get it on his body, just to see where it is, and then we can make the adjustments in Photoshop later. So actually the shins didn't turn out too bad. We're just gonna have to bump some of this up and down a little bit. Of course the possibilities are endless. You can do anything in Photoshop and make this look any way you want to. So at this point, go into Photoshop and just move some of those layers around just to get them to line up. So I'll just start at the gloves and work my way down to the feet. So my back belt has to go up a little bit higher. You may want to lock the UVs so you don't accidentally select them. And we're just going to bring that back belt up. You can hold shift down and hit your arrow buttons, or just hit your arrow buttons to move things around, right, left, up and down. And I'm just taking a look at my Maya file to see what needs to be different. So the points in the front need to go to toward the outer part of the leg a little bit more, and both of the back leg textures need to be bumped up a little bit. Alright, so I've completed the texture tweaks so that the gloves, boots, and belt all line up front and back. And you can see that the gloves, belt, and boots all line up. The last thing we need to do is create a texture reference object so that when the character starts to move, the textures won't swim around on his body. So we'll just select the character. Make sure you're in the rendering menu set. Under texturing, click on Create Texture Reference Object. If you look in the hypergraph, you'll see it appear here as a node. And then we can just right click on it and hide it. And that's it for lighting and texturing. Now our character is ready for rigging.